Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be sharing this topic today. Now, I know that oftentimes when we think about healthy communities, generally, the first thing that comes to mind is the members and how they feel supported and safe to actually participate in these individual communities inclusively. Now, however, we cannot completely achieve these healthy communities without every part or every group or every component of these community coming together to work uniformly. That's why today I'll be speaking on the topic how to community anatomy of a healthy open source community and project. And a little bit about me. I am Anita Ihuman. I'm a developer advocate and a technical writer. And I'm an open source evangelist. I'm contributing to communities like the Chaos, where I am currently leading a DEI research to help us understand the impact of the metrics we've developed. I am also contributing to Layer 5 community as a community manager and other exciting open source communities like the Good Dogs Project, the Drupal community, and so much more. And I love cats. So during this section, we're going to be talking about what is anatomy. Then we're going to move on to talk about the anatomy of open source. Then we're going to look at Let's Talk community, what determines a healthy open source community, and how to achieve a healthy open source community. Now, so let's get into it. Now, we all know what anatomy is in biology. I know I never thought I'll be talking about anatomy again after leaving my biology class, but here I am today. Well, anatomy is simply a branch of natural science that deals with the structural of organisms, structural organization of living things. Now that is what biology tells us, and it goes further to say that every living thing is made up of different parts and different organs. Like a human being, for instance, we have our head, then we have our major internal organs made of the heart, the liver, the lungs, and all of that. Then we have like our fingers, legs, and all of that. These are the different parts that a human being is actually made of, right? And so in open source, it works the same, except we don't have like body parts in open source. But yes, we have different organs within the open source community that comes together to make up our open source communities at large. And just like the anatomy of a living thing highlights different parts, so does open source communities consist of various parts, and this include the governance, the development model, the project culture, infrastructure, and then down to the community, which is the backbone of all of this. And so when we're talking about all of this, we cannot completely achieve this without diving in. So when we're talking about governance, you'd want to have a clear mission and objective for your open source community, and that is where the leadership part of it comes in, with because as our communities continue to grow and expand, there are common issues like disputes handling, role assignments, who gets to like lead what, who gets to be in charge of what, and all of that. You also want to handle things like assigning the rules and the regulations for your open source community, and that is why the governance covers some parts like the licensing, where you get to decide what is it exactly your open source community should be, and what license should it be, how transparent do I want my community to be at this point in time. You get to choose whether you want it to be closed source or open source, and other forms of necessary contributor agreements that you get to put in place. And the governance also covers like the operations, where you have persons that are into the leadership roles and the managerial roles, taking charge of everything, programs lead, the community managers, and other representatives of the community, and also stakeholders. And then governance also looks at the code of conduct, because you can't have all of these amazing individuals in one place without having rules and regulations that you expect people to abide by, right? And so our code of conduct comes together to make sure that every single person work hand in hand to follow through with these rules and regulations that exist in the code of conduct. And down to the development model, where we move further to want to put together either a project or a software or a platform that our open source project is responsible for or leading. And open source development models always follows like a sequential development process, where we have the initial plan, where the idea is developed, what exactly this project is going to be responsible for, down to the planning and initial execution. Then you move on to the expansion. Eventually the project is developed, that is under the implementation of all of the ideas and thoughts that have come together, the verification and testing, and eventually the release and retirement, where you can either go back to a continuous process of managing this, or you just continue to improve on the project subsequently as it grows. And so the development model kind of covers all of this in one place. And then we'll talk about the culture of our open source communities, because we cannot have a healthy open source community without culture, right? And here we want to decide, as a project owner, whether we want to make our open source communities intentional, or want it to be accidental, whether we want it to be welcoming to people or want it to be not so welcoming to people. At the end of the day, it becomes challenging for most individuals, whether we want our open source community to be more supportive and community focused, or more demanding, and at the end of the day people get burnt out, or whether we want our project to be inclusive, or we do not care so much about inclusion, and then at the end of the day bias takes place in every part of our communities, right? And so when we talk about our cultures and what is it exactly we want our project to be, we move further to the infrastructure. Now you want to have your code base for these projects that we've developed existing somewhere. Is it GitHub? Is it Bitbucket? Is it GitLab? And if it's existing here, how do we want it to be implemented in terms of the code, in terms of the features, the branding of the image, and how are we going to also manage the releasing and the project life cycle generally, and what milestones are we working on for this particular project or products that we're developing for this open source community. Now, once we have all that put in place, we then move forward to the community, which is where everything actually takes place, because this is the backbone of our open source projects or open source communities. Now, under our community, we want to put into consideration so many things. That is the onboarding, handling grievances and disputes, properly documenting guidelines, because you definitely want people to come in and like know where and how to get involved. So that is where documentation comes in. We talk about the accessibility of our code of conduct, because you want it to be readily available for new individuals that are still new to the concept of your community or the culture of your particular community. And then we talk about the mentorships and then the training, the collaboration and leadership, and so many other things that come under the community aspect of our open source community. Now, we can see that so much comes into putting together one open source community, from the governance down to the, code, down to the project culture, down to infrastructure, then community, and so many other parts, which is tell us that just like the human body, our open source community also have different groups, different compartments that are always up and working to make sure that everything comes together in order. And so you would also want to see your projects, as a project lead, you'd also want to see your project scale. However, you'd want to ask yourself, am I doing this open source thing right? Or is there something that I am missing that's not making my open source community as healthy as open source A or open source community B? Now, so let's talk community. Well, most open source communities today are still struggling with this question of what is wrong with my community. It's not like you're doing something wrong intentionally, or it's not like you missed out on anything. You've probably followed through with all the steps, but then it seems like your open source community does not actually tend to be classified as the healthy or perfect open source community. Well, there's so many reasons, which oftentimes are as a result of minor things that have been omitted, or minor things that are missed out during the planning and development of these communities, which is one, people always come, one of the challenges that most open source communities would experience is having many people that are joining being novices. And this is a common challenge. It's not a challenge, but then oftentimes it becomes a challenge, because at the end of the day, you're looking for people that assume roles of maintainers, or people that actually mentor the newcomers that are coming in. And so most communities would want to struggle with, often struggle with this, because there's always a need for like training in the newcomers with the technologies that the project uses, and how to interact effectively with the group and all of that. However, because most of the persons coming in are new to the entire concept of open source generally, it's difficult to achieve that. The reason being that the experts that have already gained this knowledge have probably run to non-open source communities where they get paid for their efforts, or oftentimes shy away from generally the concept of open source, since it involves voluntary contributions at the end of the day. And this also is one of the challenges that most open source community experience. Another common challenge, that problem that your open source community might be experiencing, is poor documentation, where you see people come in, but then your resources are not great of an onboarding tool enough to get them right on track to what they should be doing, how they should be doing it, and where they should get involved. And most times this hinders so many persons from actually getting involved in open source communities at all. Another common challenge that most open source communities are experiencing today is the no room for non-technical contributions. Now, we know that most projects rely on code base, and you have to like use GitHub or GitLab on most of these source code tools to make contributions. However, most of these tools do not provide necessary means for non-code contributions. We're talking about contributions that do not require writing pieces of code, community-based contributions, relational kind of contributions, content focused kind of contributions, research kind of contributions, and all of this. Most of these are not tracked on all of our source code tools. And so this leaves contributions that are interested in this part of making impact stranded, and at the end of the day, they shy away from contributing to open source communities at large. And another common challenge is that there's no form of recognition or appreciation for contributors. Now, as a contributor, when I'm in a community for a period of 6 months to 1 year, I want to see that my open source community kind of appreciates my efforts, even if not financial, to the point where I know that yes, people have recognized my efforts for this. For instance, recently in the chaos community, I got nominated as the community member of the week for my contributions over time. Now, it seems like for most persons, it would seem like a very minor thing, but it did make me smile throughout that day, because reading through all that was written out made me really, really happy to see that the community actually took out time to highlight me or spotlight me for that particular week for the efforts that I have making over time. And this also goes for like so many other communities that I've participated in, and I've noticed this minor forms of appreciation. Now, most communities do not even have this at all, and it leaves contributors exhausted after making so much efforts for a long period of time. And at the end of the day, they abandon the community and look for other communities that appreciate or recognize their efforts and contributions. Another common issue that your community might be experiencing is the inclusion challenges. Now, when we're talking about inclusion in this term, we're not talking only about the gender or the race in terms of participation, but we're looking at every single minority group and their ability for your community to make a difference and be useful, as well as welcoming to each of these broad groups, not just persons that are able and capable of participating in your communities. So being able to bring these persons from minority groups on board and also get them actively involved in the project is a challenge that most communities are still struggling with, because first off, there's so many barriers already existing that have to be tackled, and then secondly, there are also so many difficulties when it comes to bringing these persons on board and trying to like improve on our systems that are already existing that stand as a hindrance to most of these people as well. And then we definitely not forget the leadership, the leadership being homogeneous for most open source communities. Now, for instance, you want your community to be leading topics or discussions on accessibility. However, the leadership in charge of this particular group do not have an idea of what it feels like to struggle with a form of disability at any point in time. Or you want your community or your group of leaders do not even have like any form of diversity that you can look towards and say, okay, there are no good contributions on our leadership group. They're not good contributors that are in the leadership roles, and they're also um, code focused contributors like engineers and all that are coming together. And so every single time we have a call, we're getting diverse inputs from every point of view. Now, most of our leadership are actually homogeneous to a particular group of entities, and at the end of the day, it discourages most persons from participating, because when you look at the top of the chain and every single person does not identify with your class or with your kind of person, you feel like subsequently you might feel attacked when you're participating. As an individual, I always get that feel, and I feel like it can't only be me that experiences that every once in a while. So I think that is also a common challenge that most open source communities are also experiencing. And this could also be some of the things that are wrong with your communities that probably need to be identified. And so what actually determines a healthy open source community? There's so many things that come to play when putting together a healthy open source community. Now, by so many things, we talk about the maintenance, the protection, the improvement, the sustainability, and also how it supports the different members and participation within its projects, right? Now, let's take this picture, for instance. And this, I would say, this gives like a clear idea of what a healthy community should look like in our day-to-day interaction. We have the school, we have the military force, we have the banks, we have fitness center, child development center, we have like a park that everyone can come in to have like leisure. We also have a farm that produces food. And like if you look at our communities today, most communities have like system put in place to support other people that are not able to support themselves in several ways. We have different sections and all of this, and all of this coming together into one picture is what determines that, okay, my community that I'm living in is healthy in some way, because there's no way we can actually say this community is 100% perfect, but then to some extent we can vouch for our communities that yes, my community that I'm staying in is doing this to some extent and it's making me feel comfortable. And so looking at this picture now, what would you want your open source community to have in terms of being healthy, or in terms of working towards being healthy? Well, open source communities should first of all prioritize its community members, because whatever we're doing for within the project is targeted towards every individual, not only the persons that are contributing, but also people that are using this project as well, or that are participating in this program as well. And so the community, our open source community should look out for the community, the cultural practices, the collaboration and participation, the project life cycle, support and incentivization, the growth and retention between amongst members, new members that are coming in, the leadership aspect of it, the goals and roadmap that your project is working towards, its infrastructure and how it can be improved or developed subsequently, documentation as well as resources that support this project and also help other persons to get involved, the internal communication that goes on within that particular community in terms of meeting, in terms of the communication platforms and all, and then the outreach programs are all together things that would come together to build or set up your open source community, right? So how do we achieve this healthy open source community? Well, I would say it begins with the little effort, actually, because there's no way to say I completely achieved a healthy open source community in the space of 1 month. But with each block that we move, or with each piece that we put together, we're one step closer to having our communities completely healthy and supportive to everyone. And so I would say start by taking on preventive maintenance. Now, for instance, if you had a car, you definitely take your car to mechanic store every month or every 2 months, just to get a few things touched or a few things checked out, to be sure that your car does not randomly break down at the roadside one day, right? It's the same thing that goes for our open source communities. Every now and then, it's expected that as project leads, we conduct this preventive maintenance by either doing like surveys that help us study the health of our communities, or like leading researches that help us understand what it is that needs to be improved from the community members, because there's no way to understand what you're doing right or what you're doing wrong without hearing from the community members, because those are the persons that would actually help you determine if you're on the right track towards your community. And then another thing to look into is looking at the community first approach. Now, definitely, we want to sell our product or want to gain more adopters towards our open source project, but we should also bear in mind that this project will not exist without the community. And so you should prioritize the transparency of putting together everything within your community in terms of the code base, in terms of participation, and also accepting the differences that exist amongst different individuals. These are different ways that you can prioritize your community as a community lead, even while also putting first your project that you're trying to build or put together. Another way we can work towards building a healthy open source community is to recruit, train, and maintain. And so while we're doing outreach, like several outreach programs to gain more persons into our communities, telling the world about our open source communities, we should also bear in mind that these persons that are coming in would have to figure out how to navigate our communities. They're going to have to figure out how to navigate the different areas that exist in our communities. And that is where the training comes in. Having mentorship programs, having like onboarding sections every now and then to get people on track and make them like get comfortable with your open source communities plays a huge role. And then mentoring these people over time, that's where like the internships for most contributors come in. Now I see that some open source communities every once in a while sponsor 1 to 2 members that are actively participating. For instance, we try that within Layer 5 community, where we like pick 2 to 3 persons that have been actively participating over time, and then recruit them as mentees, as interns in that particular community. And this is a paid form of internship, actually, which is a way of supporting them for their contributions. And this keeps so many persons eager to want to like be consistent with their showing up in the community. And I see so many other communities also adopt this kind of methods with internship programs like Outreach, Google Season of Doc, and so many other mentorship programs. Another thing that could keep your open source community up and going and healthy is the diversity and inclusion of that particular community. So it is a lot easier to achieve a healthy open source community when it is inclusive, because at that point, you know that every part or everybody in that particular community is involved in like the planning, the development, and every aspect of that particular project growth. And so you should consider encouraging diverse roles from different minority groups within your community, and getting these persons also involved actively in the every particular stage of your open source community development and phases. And then we look at also the recognition and reward, because incentivization is a thing that so many persons look out for when they're participating in open source. And this incentivization does not always have to be financial, because funding is a thing that most open source projects are still struggling with. And so even if the project or the community is not able to provide these financial incentives, there are different ways that you can reward or appreciate contributors for participating, sending swags, highlighting them for mentee or maintainer of the month, interview series. All of these are ways and minor efforts that we can put towards recognizing and spotlighting people that makes them feel really good about themselves, not only for their contributions, but for the fact that the community is willing to, see them for all the effort that they're making over time. And so another thing to also look at as to help our community growth in terms of the health is effective meetings. Every once in a while, the community should have ways of coming together to discuss what is going on, what has been going on, and also keep members up to date with the progress of everything. This is where we discuss like the transparency of things. You want to keep your community in the light of all that is going on from the planning or from the stakeholders' point of view, and all that is going on from the development point of view, all that is going on in terms of community, ways that community members can grow, ways that community members can also participate, and so many more. All of this can be discussed during these meeting sections, which happen either bi-weekly, monthly, or even every quarter. Some communities try to stretch it out so there's so much context to discuss on whenever they come together. But however you're able to like set up your meeting plans, it's always expected that an open source community comes together every once in a while to discuss and also recognize, and also have every other program that you want to include in your community sections. Now, we cannot conclude this particular list without including effective communication tools. Now, you want your communication tools to be as effective as possible to support all individuals within your community and be as inclusive as possible. And then finally, I want to leave you with a question. What's an open source community without the community? What's an open source project without a healthy community? What is it without its members? This is a question I want you all to ask yourself as you go home today. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for listening. You can connect with me on social media platform using any of these, either LinkedIn, Twitter, or even GitHub. Thank you.